Hey guys, my name is Sasha Kesed and welcome to another episode of Market Mondays, where we talk about finances, everything that's going on with the economy, the world as a whole even, and things that matter personally to us. Today, I want to take a different perspective and I want to bring it home. I want to make this a very personal finance and personal video. So it's going to be very much off the cuff. I don't have a script in front of me. There are no numbers or stats that I'm looking to give you guys. It's to share what I've been going through, to share why, sort of giving you behind the scenes, the things that on the forefront are important, but they may seem very much at a distance, or they may seem like these things are just good to know and for those who are already there. But I think that I want to take you behind the curtains. I want to take you on the journey with me so that you see where I'm coming from is not that place of where would you invest your first million or whatever it is that people think I talk about, but to give you an open door into my life. A year ago, I found out that my dad got sick with COVID. And he really thought he could beat it on his own. And he stayed at home instead of seeing the doctors, and he saw a doctor, but he was told that he needed to be admitted to the hospital, and he didn't want to give up. He didn't want to admit that something like it could affect him. So he stayed at home longer than he should have, and then his friend took him to the hospital, and at first they had him on regular oxygen, and then they put him on the ventilators, and he lasted 6 days on the ventilators before he died. And it was hard because all I was allowed to do was like rent a hotel next to the hospital where he was at, and daily like check in, and like more than daily check in, and I was just there to be given the opportunity to talk to him. And I was trying to rationalize what the doctors and what the nurses were telling me medically versus those stories that I read up online and heard on the news of people recovering from it. And I grasped onto those, like, that's going to be my dad. He's going to come out of it. He said that he wanted to fight through this, and he will. And I was asking everybody around me, around us, to pray for him, and God had other plans. And I lost my dad. In losing him, I lost everything. I lost my home. I lost that person that I considered my home, that no matter where I was, no matter how much I had or didn't have, no matter how well I was doing, because I was living on my own at that time. I was functioning on my own, but when you still have your parents, you have this home that you're never too old to go back to. That you can be making a lot more money, but when you're home, you feel that security. You feel like things may happen, but you just run home and all of a sudden all those bad things run away. And when you cross that door, you feel the sense of security, the sense of like, they're gonna make it all right. And I had that. I'm so fortunate to have had that in my dad. And financially speaking, I had a savings account. I was able to pay for my monthly expenses. I was able to save, and I wasn't doing major purchases or anything like that. I wasn't going to travel. What I had in my savings was just backup security. But as a realtor, you always have to be mindful of budgeting forward. And so I had that to budget forward with. And when you lose a loved one, you don't consider yourself a priority anymore. You know that you have to take care of your loved one. So I had like around 31,000 in my savings, and I thought I was doing all right. It wasn't where I wanted to be, but I wasn't without a backup plan, you know? And so when my dad died, I had to process things emotionally, but as an only child, I had the full responsibility of making sure to take care of him. And that was a really hard week, to say the least. So I saw it as my duty to make sure that everything was done as it should be, as you would want it to be done for your dad, you know? So I had him brought closer to where I live, and I was blessed to have people around me that kind of pointed me in the right directions of where to find a funeral home. And here's a great florist that's very responsive, and you know, her schedule was busy, but she prioritizes this over other stuff so she can fit you in, and things like that that everyone needs, to be honest, to be pointed to. But the financial responsibility was on me. And so within a week, I was grieving, and I was fully aware that I knew what I needed to do. And so within that week, I lost all of my savings, everything that I had on my checking account, maxed out my credit card, which I didn't believe, and I still don't believe in using credit cards for consumer debt, because you use what you have. If you don't have it, you save up for it and you spend the money that you have. And so I only had, I shut down other cards. So I had one card, and it was a good amount, but I had to max it out. The whole funeral cost came out to be $37,000 or $38,000. It wasn't what I expected coming into last September. You never lose a loved one thinking that you're gonna lose them. You never see a tragedy coming, and you don't see accidents coming ahead, and that's why emergency funds exist. like personal emergency funds, right? This is why you should save up to have that cushion, because even at the same time that I felt this huge fear of how am I going to pay for my life, I was aware that, I was thankful to be able to provide for my dad what I needed to provide him. So this is why we should have savings accounts. This is why we should pay attention to our finances, because life happens and you don't want to not honor your loved one because you don't have it. So within 1 week, all of my emotional and financial and physical security, I felt like it was gone. It was lost along with him. And someone may say, well, Sasha, what's the big deal? So you lost your savings, you just keep working, sell homes and pay them off and get back to what you need to do. And that's what I had as my goal. But I couldn't do the capacity of the work that I wanted to do. And so as a realtor, you're constantly pursuing your clients. So if you stop pursuing, that's a really dangerous place to be, because you stop trying, your phones will stop ringing. And every realtor knows this. And so I had a conference for work. I had 2 conferences that I had already prepaid for as part of a mentorship that I was in. And so I went to those and I saw these agents around me, and they were getting the numbers and they were speeding past me, like I'm standing and there's trains just moving past me, and I thought, am I cut out for this anymore? Like, am I in the field that I'm supposed to be in? Because I felt like, where do you jump back in at? I couldn't find my place, It was, who am I? Am I doing videos? Am I doing contracts? Am I doing rentals? Where do I stand and how do I get back on it when I know I'm not ready yet? So that went on for a little bit. And what I realized was, with the things that I could do at the time, I had one contract, one home that was sold, and I thought I'm gonna catch up, but I had to catch up a lot. So I had to pay my card enough to keep it going. I called, and thankfully the card was at 0 APR for a certain amount of months. I had to pay back for some rent that I missed at the time, and I caught up to that. And in real estate, there's a lot of fees that you have to go through to keep using your license, and all of those things add up and add up and add up. And so within 3 months of all of that happening, I had a house, I had a listing, and so that amount went towards kind of bringing back stability, but not far enough to cover like future things. It was just to get me to not get me out of credit card debt, but to get me to being able to pay for basic things like rent and food, and just to catch me up so that I stayed in debt, but I could survive, if that makes sense. And then I had to face this reality where I had to budget. And here's the thing with budgeting, like, I realized there are 2 issues that I had that prevented me from budgeting. I've listened to and fully agreed with Gail Vox Oxley from Canada. And I took some lessons from Financial Peace University that I went through that course from Dave Ramsey. And so on the surface, I knew how to handle money. I knew to have 3 to 6 months of savings. I had that in September, right? So I looked like a responsible adult to people around me and to myself. But when it came to me being forced to budget, it was something that was out of practice for me. I thought I was responsible with the things that I was doing, but it was a whole new level to be able to say, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna write out the numbers, and I'm gonna make the budget work. One of the two things that prevented me from doing so was, I started out that as like a very excited sentence. I promise you it's not as exciting. The first thing was pride. Pride in, I don't need to budget. I could handle my finances well on my own. Why would I need to budget? Budgeting felt like I had to admit that I was at zero and that I had to be like dumber than everyone else. Because it's a fact that most people, like 80-something% of people, never budget. 80-something% of people are also in, above their heads in consumer debt, so they don't feel like they can ever get out, but they feel like they're just managing it, and as long as they can manage it and avoid like a foreclosure or something, they think they're doing fine. That doesn't mean that that is actually fine. You should budget. You should definitely budget. But for me, I thought, what is wrong with me that I can't handle my finances compared to the rest of the world? And that's a very isolating lie that debt can create, and that shuts down the conversation to actually get you to financial stability. Because if you don't talk about it, you don't see where you are in reference to where you could be. And if you don't have that safe space to communicate about your finances, then you never have a chance to take control of where you stand or where you're going. The people that I had at the time around me, I didn't feel emotionally safe to even talk about losing my dad, let alone talk about the finances that were happening behind the closed door. Because it was like, if I met all the appointments, if I showed up on time, then she's doing fine. And a part of the social kind of environment was I didn't want to let them down. The other part of it was I felt very much isolated, so I didn't know if I could even mention the topic of money, So that's where I found myself. I thought, if I can't talk to anyone about this, then my pride kicked up, and I was like, well, this isn't what I have to do. And I had to really come to a point where I had to admit to myself that I've been managing, but I'm not there. It's not good enough to get me back to zero. It's not good enough to get me back into the savings part, into the positives. So I might as well budget. And the second part of it is kind of like, we talk about budgeting and we talk about how much you need for a down payment and we talk about all these things, but book knowledge versus reality is the thing. And so how do you actually sit down and create a budget plan? How do you keep yourself on schedule and not say, it's all right, it's just like $40-something over on gas expenses this month, or I'm just spending $20 extra on groceries on this run, I'm sure I can catch up later on. Well, eventually later on, you look at your budget, you look at your numbers, and you're like, where am I going to pull this from? Okay, this is not at zero. Like at the end of the week or at the end of the month, whatever your term is to budget for, if the numbers don't stack up to zero, you're in the negative. And if the numbers do end up at zero, you have to look at what you actually budgeted for, because are you including savings? Are you including debt repayment? Are you including things that you know are going to come up, like the real estate dues, National Association of Realtors, local, state and county regulations, your own brokerage requirements, and all of those things. Insurance for your car and your rental or your mortgage, those things, are they all included there? Or do you think you're at zero? So I really fought hard against myself. And when I had to admit to needing to have a budget, it was like, okay, I feel like I'm my own student right now. Literally have to read on how to do it, sit there, analyze, okay, how do I teach myself to do it? And then sit down with a piece of paper and start from lesson 101 of budgeting. I know that when we look back and we kind of zoom out and we say, people who have financial stability, people who have the investments in place, investments in hard assets, such as precious metals or real estate, things that are classified in that category, versus investments in crypto and the stock market and things that may shift and change in value really rapidly. When we look at people who feel financially secure, they somehow talk numbers. They talk numbers, they know how much they allocated to each of those categories. And within those categories, the subcategories. So before we talk about how to best invest your money, we need to understand that those who are truly in a financially stable place, they have somehow managed to start with whatever amount they had, but they started at that budgeting 101. And they budgeted out their daily life, they budgeted for their investments, and they don't go back and say, okay, I have this and this, I no longer need to consider money. I can go out on any vacation that I want, I can buy any purse or shoes that I want. I don't have to think about it anymore. Because I think that once you go through the road of building that stability, you know just how badly it felt when you didn't have it, and then just how long and how hard you had to work for to create that stability. That doesn't happen like this, right? So when we look at those who are truly financially stable and they're talking numbers, they're talking budgets, and somehow we as regular consumers feel like we don't need to have a budget because we think we're making enough money. And that is ridiculous, because not looking at a thing doesn't make it not so. It makes it harder for us to acknowledge where we are, and it makes it impossible for us to get to where we want to go. And this is when this overwhelming kind of feeling creeps up in many of us, when we think, oh my gosh, I want to be there. And that seems unattainable. And there's this that I don't want to deal with. So we're somewhere in the middle, trying to numb ourselves with whatever we choose so that we don't have to move from point A to point B because we think we're not capable of doing it. And maybe I needed to be at that point. Maybe I needed to see what it was like to budget from zero in order for me to be able to look you in the eyes and say budgeting works. And I know it looks like you're just trying to feed yourself right now, but it'll get you to retirement. It'll get you to financial stability. It'll get you to those homes or a house. You know, it'll get you so much, not tomorrow, but you start at where you're at. And believe me, I understand, because I've been there and I hated that lesson. Like, I'm not that far down the road, but I've come a long way, if that makes sense. So this past year has been me falling to understand how to rise, but also to understand that I'm capable of doing it. Whereas I think before, I thought I'm only capable if. And when you include the if, it's like I'm only capable if I have the right people around me. I'm only capable if I have, you know, somebody to run to if I need that backup. And then really realizing I didn't think I was capable of what? Like, I didn't think I was capable of the very things that I was already doing. But the budgeting and the planning and climbing myself out of that has been really healthy, actually. Has been really healthy. I think that's the point. So, with it, I want to start this series. I want to show you what it was like when I sat down and I had the rest of the funeral expenses to pay for, when I had my dad's marker to pay for, when I had over $8,000 of credit card of debt to pay for, how I was paying for it little by little each month, and then realizing I still couldn't budget for it. So I made a couple of very important, very big decisions to get me caught up, and how I'm building my savings to rebuild myself up to where I want to be, for me to say I am in a safe place. And then hopefully to take a couple of you along with me on that ride, and to walk you through of how to climb out of whatever it is you're in, realizing that there's both a financial and an emotional component that you will climb out of. Sometimes you just need someone to be there along your side. And then rebuilding your financial and emotional and kind of social stability, and then building together. So that's where we are, and that's where we're heading. And I know that if anything, it'll help me understand a lot more of my clients better. It'll help me understand a lot more of the people around me better. But I sincerely hope that you guys can see the positives and negatives, and kind of learn from my lessons, and for this to be a place where you don't have to say, admitting that I don't have it all together financially right now, where it's no longer something that will separate you from the life that you can be living. So let's open up the subject. Let's talk about it in a safe place where you can say the D word, debt. You can say, I feel overwhelmed. You can say, emotionally it's harder than physically right now. But I have been struggling to not look, and I haven't looked at my finances in a long time. As long as you know where you're at, we can start there. we can have an honest conversation. And that is the point where your victory begins. So, see you next Monday when we talk about budgeting 101, and then we'll take it from there.